I'm sure I'll hear all of this.
Where I put my phone.
You did it. I know Joe has it. It did it for the and that's wonderful. Yeah, a lot of people are right? Certainly.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So happy to see you all here. I know it's late in the semester, but a little discussion about advocacy and activism at this moment in time might be exactly what we all need. I hope you're enjoying our cookies during the end of the semester. So welcome to everyone online and everyone that's in person. We are so happy to have you all. This kind of panel came about because I had reached out as a faculty member to the organizers of the Women's March last year to kind of get some people to come and talk to us at the school. And it took some time, but here we are. And I'm going to introduce our powerhouse of a panel in front of me. And I'm going to start over here. So Lily Nussbaum and Edin Perlove met as volunteers for the Women's March on Washington, the New York City chapter. They coordinated fundraisers, they ran community building events for them, and ultimately brought thousands of New Yorkers to Washington for the Women's March last year. After that, they kind of worked together and then developed their own organization called the America 101 Project, where they are developing panels and discussion opportunities, storytelling, to really promote active resistance for the many issues that we are facing. Edin also works for the Brooklyn Arts Council and is finishing her master's degree in business and nonprofit management. And Lily is getting her degree in mental health counseling and volunteering for the crisis text line. So they are both in the end of semester that the rest of us are all in as well. Nicole Powell. You can, yeah, okay, good. Nicole Powell founded NYIndivisible in December of 2016, which works to really hold elected and appointed officials accountable for protecting the rights of all people and to support legislators at all levels of government who value people over party. They've delivered thousands of signed letters to elected officials, canvassed in the streets, and organized call campaigns to channel constituent power. And then we have Nikki Douglas right here. She works with the Black Lives Matter movement. She's also an actor and a dancer and currently teaches movement and choreography at NYU. She firmly believes in the intersection of art and activism and is currently forming an equity task force with fellow professional art makers to promote racial, gender, and all possible forms of equity in the New York City theater community. And then we have Esha Bhandari from the ACLU. She's an alumni of the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism and Columbia Law School, so welcome back. And she's a staff attorney with the ACLU Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, where she focuses on litigation and advocacy related to online speech, academic freedom, privacy rights, and the impact of big data. Esha was previously an Equal Justice Works Fellow with the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, where she was involved in litigating cases concerning a right to counsel in immigration proceedings, detainer policies, and discriminatory state and local laws. She's also been a staff attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights, where she worked on 2 trials challenging a Texas law that limited women's access to reproductive health care. And then finally, we have Elizabeth Falcone. She's the director of youth programs at the Mayor's Office to Combat Domestic Violence. She oversees the New York City Healthy Relationship Training Academy, which is a peer education program on dating violence prevention and healthy relationship development for 11 to 24-year-olds. Lizzie previously worked as an after-school specialist at Girls Inc., where she facilitated a girls' empowerment and self-defense class. So we clearly have an amazing panel that can talk about multiple experiences around advocacy and activism in the field that we all share. And I am going to pass it on now to Lily to get us going.
Thank you so much, Monique. Thank you for having us. Hi, this is wonderful. Thank you for coming out in the last stretch of school and finals. I know it's a stressful time. I'm feeling it too. And I'm really grateful to see so many people in this room. It's funny, I was thinking about it this morning, and Monique reaching out to the march is sort of a perfect micro-scale example of grassroots organizing. You wanted to be proactive. You wanted to do something for your students. You wanted to talk about activism. And so you reached out, and we put our heads together. And that is a perfect example of how this works. My relationship to the Women's March started the exact same way. I filled out a volunteer form. I didn't have any idea what that meant. I was prepared to be on the cleanup crew the day after. It didn't matter. I was happy to do anything. I wanted to do anything. I felt like I was scrambling madly to find something to do, anything. And then I got a phone call asking me to be on the team. It was chance, and I went to a meeting. There were a dozen other women there, and we put our heads together, and we started planning together. And that was happening in dozens of cities in every state in the country. It was a profound experience. I know Eden is going to talk to you in a minute about her experience with the same thing. But it brought us here, and that's something really remarkable to me. This was almost a year ago. And since then, obviously the march happened. We all still felt that call, that urgency to be participating. And Eden and I met through our work with the march, organizing events together, and we decided to keep going. And it took us a while to figure out what that meant for us, what our actual passion was in this new environment. I'm going to let Eden talk about America 101 for a second before we begin.
Yeah, so I think for us, we were working with a group of women that were all really excited about creating change, but we all had very different passions for what our changes wanted to be. And some people wanted to focus very specifically on policy, and some people wanted to specifically focus on just urgent matters that were in the moment. And Lily and I got really excited about the idea of education. My mom was an educator, and I think the most important thing is making the really complex, confusing time that we're in more digestible and making it just easier to understand. And because I didn't originally have a background in politics, I was like, I want to just learn more. What does this kind of stuff mean? So it's also an exciting process where I'm excited to learn from a lot of really educated and very socially active individuals. And so our project, America 101 Project, was a way to try to bring that to communities of people. So we're like, let's get a group of people together who are all on the same page and really want to talk to the community and bring forth their ideas. So yeah.
So to begin, I'm just going to keep going on down the line. If there's a question that I ask that any one of you feels like you want to jump on first, go for it. We're all, So first I want to ask, why did you choose this field? Or do you feel that this field chose you? And what do you like about activism or advocacy, depending on the organization? And what's the most challenging about it? So it's sort of a three-parter. Why did you choose your field? What do you like about activism or advocacy? What's challenging? How did you choose this issue? We can start going down the line. You want to start, Nikki?
I am, yes, so I am first and foremost an artist, and then I think that the kind of art that I'm interested in is at various intersections. It's at the intersection of activism, it's at the intersection of advocacy as well. The kind of art that I create is theater-based and dance-based. I create art that is interested in unpacking the Black female experience in America. And art, I think, chose me. I think that I am built specifically for it, and I'm not sure what else I could possibly do. So that's the first prong of it. The second prong is what?
What do you like about activism?
Oh, what do I like about activism? I like very much that inside of activism is the space to say what I believe and to stand up for what I believe in. And I think that activism also creates community. I think that it brings people together in an organic way. And I quite like that. I think that art has a way of gathering folks already, and so to be able to have that to also have that activism portion of it, I feel like it unifies the thought as well. And then the third prong.
That's most challenging. We're going to get into this more later.
Yeah. Art is challenging, I think, because it's not always accessible to everyone. I think that in a lot of communities, art, the idea of art or fine art is like a luxury, is like something that, you know, you can only have access to if you have the money for it, or you have time for it when you're not making money to survive, right? So a lot of what I'm interested in has to do with bringing art to communities where it might not necessarily have been otherwise. Yeah.
Terrific.
So can everyone hear me if I speak like this? For myself, I was thinking about this when Lily sent us the questions. It sounds more second-wave feminist than I want it to. But when I was in college, I felt like I really had so many opportunities to think about gender dynamics and power and societal institutions, which was really what I was focused in. And sort of once you start seeing those things, I couldn't unsee them anymore. And I knew that this was the work that I wanted to do professionally. So I felt like it was a calling in that sense. But I guess in the way that if I felt chosen by my work, I sort of just stumbled into it. After I graduated, I had a really hard time finding a job. So I actually worked at Girls Inc. through AmeriCorps. So I was a full-time volunteer and was super grateful to be placed at Girls Inc. I started leading that empowerment group because they were short a specialist for a semester. So they were like, you can do it. And I was like, okay, I can do it. And then really from there, it just like these opportunities seemed to open up, but not in a way that I ever felt like I had control over. And I think still to this day, I would stand by that. What I like the most, though, about what I do is that I'm grateful I get to do it professionally. And really in the work I'm doing, it's talking to young people about how their relationships are going. And so it's all these issues I care about, but on these really small levels of like, does your partner have a right to look through your phone without asking you? Let's talk about that. But then we see that play out in larger dynamics too. I think particularly all the time, but right now as well. But for me, what always is challenging, and I know we're going to talk about burnout, is that I can't approach this work without bringing my full self into it, even though sometimes you just want to go to your job, answer a few emails, and not feel so personally invested every single time, because you're putting yourself out there all the time. And I'm even lucky that I do a lot of my work administratively, but I am working with staff who are in those classrooms, leading those conversations every single day, and I see the way it wears on them. So it's really, the challenge is trying to support our own selves and then everybody else in this movement and holding all these things.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I work in communications on the live stream. Could you just speak closer to the mic? It's
Yes.
not picking up so much for the live stream.
Okay.
Can you also say your names?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm Nicole Powell with NYIndivisible. I would say I didn't choose the context in which I got activated. I certainly wouldn't have chosen our current president and administration, and that was the spark for me to get active. I did choose the Indivisible guide as the way I wanted to get active. I had a moment just after the election where I was standing outside Trump Tower screaming at a building, and things kind of in my mind got very quiet, and I thought, this isn't helping. I'm staring at a building yelling, and I want to do something that's actually going to change things. And that's not to diminish the impact of protests. I've since kind of gotten educated myself in realizing, holy cow, that makes a big difference. But I wanted to do something that was a little bit more strategic and working within the system that we have. And when I read the Indivisible Guide, it was kind of a clear structure of 5 tools that citizens with no specific background in activism could use to make a difference. So I kind of didn't choose the circumstance and then chose the way I wanted to get active. But being active and trying to do something didn't feel like a choice. I couldn't just be outraged. What I like about it is that it's brought me into contact with a lot of other people who, for me, a lot of my social sphere divided into 2 parts, divided into people that were outraged and people who were doing something about that. And I really needed to be with the people who wanted to do something. So it brought me into much more contact with those people who are using their time. The thing I don't like about it is that it does take a tremendous amount of time. And people are very passionate, and sometimes that can get misdirected towards each other, or it can kind of feel like a lot of very activated atoms bumping against each other rather than really focused and directed. So yeah. Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Esha Bhandari and I'm with the ACLU. I've been a public interest lawyer for my entire legal career, and I came to this from an interest in human rights, which I've had since a young age, since I can remember. I was always interested in human rights movement, both domestically but internationally, and the connections between, people in other countries who are fighting for human rights. There's a very international, global scope, and also over time and over history. And from my interest in human rights and my belief in human rights, I came to what I specifically do, which is impact litigation, which is very domestic focused on civil liberties and civil rights, because it was both a combination of my passion, but also it allowed me to be a lawyer, which is something I enjoy, and do it in a way that feels concrete, because I discovered after going to law school that I really enjoyed just the process of being a lawyer and working on cases that I care about, and I realized that I am very fortunate insofar as I get to use the skills and do that work which I enjoy, but only ever in service of cases that I really care about, and that's a luxury that not a lot of lawyers have. But I both enjoy the day-to-day work, and I enjoy the feeling of having a concrete problem and having an outcome. Whether we win or lose, there's a concrete outcome, and it feels less amorphous to me. So that's the way that I've chosen to be active, which isn't to say there weren't many other paths, but this is sort of what brought me here. And that's exactly what I would say to what's most rewarding about it. It's the feeling of doing something very specific, seeing a problem in the world, strategizing about how I can use the law or a legal tool, which is my particular tool. Sometimes it's not the right tool or the appropriate tool, but where it is, there's something I can do about it, and seeing concrete change. And then the most challenging part, which I'm sure we'll get into more later, I think is dealing with criticism, because I think there's too often a perception that when you're speaking what you feel are obvious truths or obvious calls to justice, that there's a lot of agreement on that. But that's not true. There's a lot of disagreement about what those principles are, what they mean, and a lot of that disagreement can come from within your own community. And I think that's hard to deal with on an emotional level, and you have to really not only develop a thick skin, although I think that's important, but also get over a feeling of maybe being conflict averse or learn to embrace that. And it's something I'm still working on.
This is a question actually for nichHi and Nicole. If you could tell us a little bit, each of you, about not necessarily the day-to-day, but just what an example of working with a grassroots organization like Black Lives Matter, like NYIndivisible, what is just a description of the environment and how you work with others. I know that Black Lives Matter isn't a hierarchical movement, which is fascinating. NYIndivisible is, I think. There's no leadership? I'm wrong. But if you could tell us a little bit, just an example of a meeting or how it works to be a participant of each of these movements. Thank you.
For sure. I do want to say that my affiliation with the Black Lives Matter New York City chapter is so small. I'm really just like one of the people that shows up sometimes. And the way it normally happens is, we get an email. It's like we're meeting and this is the location, and bring the last set of action task things that you were, that we assigned for the last meeting, and whether or not you did them, be able to explain, how you went about completing the task and or how you were not able to and why and all of that. And it just sort of is like we sit in a circle and we talk about what needs to happen next. And we sometimes will set a place to, go and scream and do that good thing. And sometimes we won't.
What are some of the action items?
Some of the action items will include gathering names of individuals that we think should be associated with Black Lives Matter, whether it's local politicians or Congress folks or senators, and trying to reach out to them, trying to get access to the folks who have access to them, and trying to get them on the phone or get them to one of our meetings. That's one really. Mm-hmm. That's one that comes up a lot. That's one that we. Great. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Remind me, the question was how the day-to-day of NYIndivisible. A lot more emails than I anticipated. NYIndivisible. How many here know what the Indivisible Guide is or have heard of it? It started out just after the election last year in November. I think it was just 2 congressional staffers who had witnessed the success of the Tea Party, ironically, wrote an 18-page Google Doc suggesting some ways for the left to employ the same tactics that the Tea Party used to kind of obstruct Obama. They made this guide to help people on the left feel like they could do something to resist the incoming administration. And it got passed around for quite a while, just simply as a Google Doc, and now it is there. Anybody can start an Indivisible group. There are 7,000 Indivisible chapters across the country. In New York State, there are 500. NYIndivisible, the group that I founded, is very active in the metropolitan area. And I didn't quite know what I was getting into. We have a national team that they've gotten a great deal of support and funding through the popularity they've gathered. So over the summer, they installed regional directors. So it is, to a degree, hierarchical in that they've got strategy experts really looking at where we need to focus our energy, and they're kind of helping do calls to action to chapters like ours in order that we don't have to be looking at that national view and figuring out where to best use our resources. They tell us, we mobilize our volunteers. We're still purely a volunteer organization. And the day-to-day, is looking at those 5 tools. So the 5 tools are letter writing, calls to our senators, meetings, town halls, and elections. And there's a lot of engagement with our representatives. We have monthly meetings with Senator Gillibrand, her staff. We've had meetings with Senator Schumer. Often state senators will come to our group meetings. They've even asked us to speak at their opening for a bill or something like that. So we've kind of gotten a little a network going with our legislators, which is sort of like the trademark of the Indivisible approach to activism. And then there are things like this panel and press interviews or little things. That's part of our approach as well. Is we've got to raise awareness and do as much of storytelling of how people are affected by certain policies. So a lot of this translates into a massive amount of emails and social media. We've fortunately got a few people doing posts, and we've got a team working on that. But and then of course making sure we do the things ourselves, calls to our senators, and trying to read up on things like our state politics, which I will inevitably have to mention the IDC, but I'll save it for another question.
Yeah, it's funny you just said reading up on state politics, and I think the biggest challenge I've heard from people who showed up at our events, the biggest thing is how to focus. There are too many things. There's so much going on. There are so many issues on the table of crucial importance. No one outweighs any other. There's just monumental problems to solve. We all feel, I think I said before, this sense of urgency, a call to arms. How do we fix it? I know I certainly feel sort of a mad scramble to try to help. And I think it's really important to talk today about how to focus, how to accept the fact that we can't fix everything ourselves. The most rewarding part of our work with the Women's March New York chapter was the teamwork. None of us were an island. This was the product of 20-odd people working day in and day out together to ensure that, 6,000 people got on buses. We were all, a lot of emailing also, everyone on the same Google Doc, making sure that every name and people who wanted to transfer tickets and all of this minutia, that ended up being of critical importance. And that was really humbling to me, especially because we have sort of grandiose ideas for ourselves, what we can do, the impact we can have as individuals. But at the end of the day, we are most impactful when we're working with other people, when we're communicating properly with other people. The magnitude of the march was phenomenal. It was not a perfect organization. It couldn't have been. It came together in 2 months, But it was a profound experience. It was a profound learning experience, rather, because we all learned how to dive in and work together, hell or high water. That was what we were there to do. There was no time for egos. There was no time for anything but the task at hand. And in a way, having the march was a blessing because It gave us focus. There was one agenda. We had to do it. It was happening no matter what, so we better do a good job. And then the march happened. And then we sort of thought, well, okay, now what? All of these issues are still here. What do we do? And then that feeling crept up again of being overwhelmed, of not knowing what to focus on. And that feeling is kind of accompanied by like, oh, I'm not going to do anything. I don't know how to do this. I can't. And so I would love for everyone to talk a little bit about burnout, about what to do when you feel overwhelmed, about, I mean, you guys all touched on before what led you to your field. But what do you do with that feeling that, oh my God, I can't do it. There's too much. There are too many horrors in the world. I'm going to go back to bed, which is not an option. We can't do that. But we also can't fix everything individually. So how do you pick your passion? How do you stick to it? How do you not get exhausted? Or is it impossible not to get exhausted and we just have to accept that as the new normal?
So I have a couple of thoughts. One is I think it's important to acknowledge that you may care about a lot of things. I think we all probably care about a lot of things, but we can't be as engaged in every one as we'd want. And in part, I think this is just a way to stay motivated is to pick a few things. Maybe it's one, like for me, you know, I do my advocacy work as a professional matter and I have the issues that I work on. So that's the path that I've chosen. But if it's not even what you do, your professional job or your day job, you know, picking a few things concretely and then having goals for yourself. What do you want to accomplish with what you're going to do? And whether that's a 5-year plan or I would recommend setting a shorter plan so that you can see sort of the fruits of what you're doing. I think that's really critical to giving yourself a sense of accomplishment. And that doesn't mean that you're disengaged on the other issues, but it's maybe saying other people can take a leadership role. I can be a follower on those, right? I can, you know, when I'm asked to be an ally or to show up for something or to sign my name to something, I can do that, but I don't have to be as engaged on that as I am on my issue or my 2 things where I'm really trying to push the envelope and I have set a goal, you know, whatever it is, whether for me it's through my vehicle of the law, so I have, you know, whether it's a case that I really want to file, or if I were doing grassroots work, I want to have, you know, a certain number of actions, or reach out and have 10 conversations over a certain period of time, whatever it is. I think setting concrete goals for yourself and being realistic about what you can achieve will actually give you a sense of accomplishment that'll motivate you when it feels like there's so much to do in the world.
I think of this question in a semantic way, and it seems when I think about burnout and activism, I think of the list of things that I should do, right, or what I should be doing for gender and equality rights, or what I should be doing for female reproductive rights, or what I should be doing for this, what I should be doing for that, and then I think about what I need to do. And I do that first. And I think that is the way I access what I think is important, and that's how I fight back against burnout, because burnout is real and getting exhausted is real and it will happen. And I'm not sure that we need to let ourselves become exhausted. I think self-care is really important, and I think it's okay to take time for yourself and to be still and to be with yourself and do what you need to do to take care of yourself inside of it, because an exhausted, weak body is not useful in our various movements. So I think take care of yourselves. And I think considering what you need to do is how to access it.
I would also echo a lot of what's been said already. For myself, the way I help deal with burnout, it's something I experience a lot, I feel, is being a little laser focused on what are the things that I can do. I have not figured out how to end gender inequality yet. But what I can do is help a school talk to their students about relationship abuse and unhealthy and abusive or healthy behaviors in their relationship. That's something I can do. And I'm not reaching all of New York City kids. I've reached a classroom of 25, but that is definitely a start, and I can be a part of that. But for me, burnout really comes in of just like doing the work day to day and being like, I've not ended gender inequality, and I've been doing this for 4 years. And so really for me, burnout is like kind of just recognizing and accepting that it's something that I have to manage every single day. And I feel like for myself, there can be a lot of shame and guilt in that. If they're like, calling my congressman after a really long day is like, I can't do it. It's too much for me. But I generally find that like if there is a protest happening, I can be there and show up. There are things that they're equally small and doable, but for me there are some days where one just feels like a mountain or a boulder I can't push, but there's something else I could do, and going for that route. And also sometimes there are days where I'm like, I'm going to watch Top Chef and eat cheese, and that's what I need to do for myself tonight to be able to show up tomorrow. And that's also like, I hope it's a valid choice because it's one that I have found myself making in order to just manage what it means to be doing this work and thinking about these things constantly, and then coming home and opening up my computer and seeing them all again on my Facebook feed. It's a lot. So I would say figuring out how you can keep making yourself feel good so you can keep showing up, that's what you have to do to address burnout.
Yeah, I would second the kind of keeping things contoured to what you can do and what you're interested in. In working with volunteers, it's been really interesting that no matter how kind of laid out you want to be, you really watch certain people light up about specific issues or specific things that they feel are more effective or that they're more inclined to do. Like some people absolutely love being out on the street with a clipboard getting signatures because they get to feel like they're like changing people's minds. And for some people that is the absolute worst, and they don't want that kind of human interaction. They'd much rather, text people to vote for Doug Jones, like zero human interaction. And we've really tried to listen to other people and put them in roles that fit for them. I would also say that having kind of a tag team of leadership, just you take this one. I can't take. I'm good for right now. I'll be a follower on this issue. It's so helpful to have people who can kind of push you forward when you can't. But at the same time that I would love to promote self-care and say that total exhaustion should not be the new normal, I also think that, at least for us, we deal with a lot of people who are active for the first time. So even just doing things like phone calls is uncomfortable and different and kind of feels like that's 10 minutes or 5 minutes out of my day that I would be doing other things. A lot of people are not used to, since before this last year, they weren't building this kind of stuff into their daily activities. So in that, I encourage people to treat it a little bit more like a workout. Do all you can do. When you're exhausted and you're just like, I can't do any more, do one more thing and then see where you're at. And then take breaks, but make sure you come back. That's really important. We've had people take the summer off, but if they come back, that momentum still carries.
Absolutely. I think that's, I love that you said that. I have struggled, I didn't know the term self-care a year ago, which is something because now I'm going into mental health counseling. But I wasn't familiar with it, and when I learned it, and I learned how important it was to people, at first I really was skeptical. I thought, there isn't time. Can't do that. We can't. How can we possibly, take a day to ourselves when, London is burning or whatever. It's like, how is this possible? And then going to our events, working these rooms full of incredible people. We would run sign-making events before the march and postcard writing events, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit again. There were so many people who would come up and ask how to take care of themselves. They didn't know. They were exhausted. All they do is read the news. Every alert on their phone, they would check. They weren't doing work. They weren't having dinner with their families. I mean, the most, the word that comes to mind is dramatic, but I don't mean that negatively. It was so intense, how people were internalizing what's happening. And that really changed my perspective, because it's true. If you're immobilized by what's going on, you're of no help at all. You can't. If you feel like you just can't do it anymore, you need to sleep for 10 hours, and God bless the people who can do that. I understand the value of that as long as you come back. I think Nicole put it beautifully. As long as you come back, as long as you understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint, that you are needed, that you alone are not going to solve this, but you are a necessary piece of the whole, and it just doesn't operate as well without you. And so you have to take that time. You have to eat that cheese. I think it is a necessity. But then you have to come back. You have to do it with the knowledge that you are resting in order to come back and be the best addition you can be to the cause. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice, so my background is in theater, actually, and the best piece of advice I was ever given was take 15 minutes for yourself every single day. Whatever that means to you, whether that means you go walk around the block or you just watch 15 minutes of something on YouTube, but it's just take 15 minutes to yourself. And when I started implementing that in my own life, I was able to not only ground myself, but I was able to actually more effectively see everything that was going on because I wasn't allowing it to overwhelm me. So I think, if anything, try to take 15 minutes to yourself at some point today or within the week, even if it's just a start. It really does make a huge difference.
So now I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the country. I have a very broad question that you can just wing it with. What is most frightening to you right now? What is the most alarming thing that you keep coming back to, whether it's literally on the front page of the paper or in, every time you scroll through Twitter or in the alerts on your phone, or if it's just something that keeps eating at you? Because I feel like the thing that we keep coming back to, or let's say two things maybe, because there's a lot going on, maybe that's what we need to think about focusing on. If there's just something that you keep, it's like, God, why is this happening? And there's 50 other things that you also think, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. But if there's just one or two that you just can't get out of your mind, I think that's a good place to start in terms of finding a way to contribute and be active. So I just want to ask all four of you, if there's any one, if there's too many to count, if you need an extra hour.
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. I think, so, being at the ACLU, we're a multi-issue organization, and there's a lot of different areas that we work on. And one of the things that has, I think, been really critical for us this year has been our ability to go into court when people's rights are at stake, when there's unconstitutional policies. And that's a really important part of what we do, but we need to have public awareness and support of the issues and cases, because not everything, as I said, can be solved with a lawsuit, and even the courts and the court system are influenced by what's going on in the world. So my concern is that over time the sense of urgency fades, or people get used to what's happening. And so, we're left fighting in the courts, but the front page headlines don't necessarily come as easily, or the evening news doesn't cover what's happening, or people have moved on to other issues. So my hope is that people are just as engaged a year from now on, civil rights issues, civil liberties issues that are in the news right now. But my fear is that, understandably, there's a lot going on and that those will not command the same attention.
I think for myself, there are a lot of things that I'm frightened of, like for this past year. But I think that something that it struck me much earlier this year that I think underlies a lot of where my fears are is just how scary it is to me, how quickly things that Obama was the first president I voted for, so I also took this election really personally, that like my candidate didn't win was something that shocked me. And then I think to realize like how quickly these social institutions that I've always been optimistic about and always put a lot of faith in, and how much work it took to get us to the place I saw us going. And then like in 6 months, like all of that just feels like it falls away, which, again, the optimist in me like has to always try to fight that feeling in myself, like, is everything just going to fall apart? And then it takes years to get back together. And like we're here talking about all the work it takes for us to just try to maintain the ground. But, I think I have hope in that too, that us working and coming together so much, hopefully we can keep this momentum and keep pushing for. I feel like right now we're just like trying to hold where we are, but keep pushing forward, across all of our lifetimes. The level of normalization I even have started to feel about all of this, like sometimes I have to snap myself out of to, say, no, this isn't normal. And, I'm an adult. When we work with young children and we can start seeing the way they're struggling with this, like, that also helps reawaken me to saying, like, no, it's not even just for myself that I have to always put my foot down and say this isn't normal, but it's for, other people who don't have the experiences that we all have.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the experience of working with?
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah, so around, just in the way of, it's been echoed before of us all talking about, like, part of this work is really just coming together with everybody. And so after the election, like, it was just something that everyone was talking about. And I think my office was a little confused of, like, how do we address this? Do we just, like, we all just came into work the next day and we had meetings, but, like, we all were just sort of looking at each other like, are we going to talk about what just happened? But it was really talking to my peer educators who lead these workshops, where our workshops are 90 minutes long. We have a lot of curricula to cover through, and they were like, I can't even get through an intro. I have high school and middle school students asking me what's going to happen, because we're coming in as the mayor's office. So they're like, the mayor, what's going to happen? And so it was really, we've spent a lot of time now in our workshops talking about, regardless of the relationships that are modeled for us by the adults in our lives, by the president of our country, what is the relationship that we as people want to have, and what the work that we want to do every day with the people we love to keep those relationships, despite all the messages you might be getting from other people who you've been told know better, know what's right, and that you should trust. Maybe turn that trust inward to yourself and think about what you want and work to that, is the way we've tried to address this for young people ages 11 to 24. The older you get, the more nuanced you can be about it. But really for middle schoolers, we see them saying, like, well, if the president says this is okay, what should I do with that? We don't want to tell people, like, not to respect social institutions, but maybe to question them a little more, think for themselves about it.
Thank you, Nicole.
I think the scariest thing for me right now, and I think this is a little driven by social media, is what appears to be in my generation like a very quick and like full like emotional response to what happens in the news, right? And like really like beautifully worded posts about how terrible things are and like what needs to happen next, and then what feels like the next day a complete like never happened, and the post is about like I don't know, whatever happened on Broad City the night before. Like it's crazy to me, and I think it speaks a little bit to burnout, or it's not even burnout. It's like, because how can you be burned out if you never really ever did anything? I'm afraid that, I don't know, we almost have too much access to, not too much access, but everything is happening so quickly, and we have it right here, like in our hand. It's my phone, and we can so quickly say what we want to say and get out what we want to get about, say what we want to say about it, and then boom, there's something else, and we're like swiping through, and everything is a swipe through, and if you're not being like physically affected by what's happening, it's almost like it didn't happen, and that is so scary to me. And I don't know. I don't know what to do about it besides, talk to my friends, like, to their faces, try to bring, like, real life conversations to what I'm experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, like casual activism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like writing. It's because the environment on social media makes you think that it's valuable.
Yeah.
Whoops. The environment makes you feel like it's more valuable than it actually is to post something that could be beautiful and profound, but really it's gone, and then you're talking about a TV show or whatever 5 minutes later. Yeah, I don't know that needs a name.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. What's that?
Performative.
Performative. Yes, exactly. It's performative. Right.
Gosh, what an optimistic question.
Sorry.
what most stresses me out. I have a few answers. I'll start with the most depressing and go up. I can't stop an iceberg from melting. I'm scared about that. Policy's not going to change that kind of stuff. The next one is that as I work more among activists and kind of witness a lot of the activity on the left, which is where I fall politically, if that was a secret, is there are issues that were there before, but there's some friction between, you have the Bernie camp and the Hillary camp, or you just have various. It's a huge demographic, the left, and not everybody's going to see eye to eye on everything. And I don't think fighting against something is going to just it might make you forget about those differences, but it doesn't quite resolve it. I think there are solutions out there. So I'm optimistic, but I don't know what they are. And I think they're unclear to all of us. I think we all want to, figure out how to not have that kind of friction. So I stress about that. I think that it's counterproductive, and I believe there's a solution. I just don't know what it is. And the thing I feel more empowered about, and I spend as much time as I can worrying about that one, is getting the right legislators into office. It's too bad that we have a lot of the wrong ones right now. Even some of our Democratic representatives are kind of like C- representatives for the issues that are important to us. So we have an election in 1 year in 2018 that's going to, we can clean house. And the level of awareness that has been activated, and not just performative, but like people are aware, and even just the performative aspect does add it contributes just a little bit more. One more person is going to see that post on that person's feed. So that stuff, you can do a lot more than that, but it starts to create an awareness that can really pay off in the voting booth. But we have to make sure people get there. And we have to make sure we primary the right candidate, so you're not choosing between the least of two evils.
Yes. Are we with time?
Okay, so we would like to take the rest of this time to answer questions from the audience. And let's start right here. Yeah.
How many people of color work on the Indivisible board?
It's unfortunately a rather white organization.
How do you feel about that?
I feel frustrated by it. We have
What are you doing about it?
Constantly about how to increase the diversity of our organization. Our regional director is of color, which is fantastic, and we're working on getting more people involved with it. From
How are you doing that?
How are we doing that? We're looking to partner with organizations that are already working with a large minority population so that we can also start to build them into our organization at the board level.
Do you see direct action being taken place to make that a reality?
We're working on it. I mean, everything takes time to unfold as we identify what issues are there. We've already built partnerships. We've worked with people all throughout the year to try and improve this. I can't say we've hit the nail on the head just yet as to creating enough diversity in our organization.
Right behind you.
Is it afternoon yet? Good afternoon. How are you guys? So I want to make a comment and a question. So first, I want to comment on your fear. I share the same fear of this slacktivism phenomenon that we see on social media. Right. It really does scare me. And another thing that scares me is that we're sitting in the Columbia School of Social Work having a panel on social work and activism without the mention of direct action and how it plays into like Nazis and white supremacists actually coming onto our campus and being funded by our school. So I guess my question to y'all is, what is the role of direct action in actually achieving social change?
Anyone?
It's a broad question. I mean, what direct action in terms of getting out, hitting out?
Protest, platform denial, whatever.
Platform denial. In terms of protests, the show of resistance is all the public platforms that we can use to make our voices heard are important, and I think we're seeing that people are listening to that, not just the news media or other people, slacktivists, but legislators, people who are really making decisions based on public opinion are listening to things like protests.
But what about like in Colombia, where like Colombia actually seeks to persecute and give disciplinary action to those who protest against Nazis and white supremacists? So what do you do when it's happening here?
I'm not sure that they can speak to how to be activists on Columbia's campus, but your point is well taken, and that is certainly something that has been happening. Yeah. Let's go right here.
Hi, good afternoon. Excuse me. As an alum, I want to say thank you for having this panel. And to speak to your point, I think one important thing about activism is being creative. And if there are actions being taken that you are not comfortable with, then perhaps you need to band together with your fellow students and find other ways, including social media, including email, including texting, using the technology we have available to reach each other and band together. Because certainly in this country, being creative and finding ways of making a point while still being silent has been super effective. And I certainly want to shout out the gentlemen in this room because as an alum, I can say I'm very happy to see more men entering the field. And I appreciate the question that came first from you, sir. So I really appreciate that and think that we certainly need to be together in all of this, there are a number of social problems, as was mentioned, and, the more we can be cohesive, the better we can be in general, and the better, the more we can make a difference, so to speak. We can definitely be creative and find ways to solve social problems so that, people like my child, who is 6 years old, will not have to deal with some of the issues that are going on right now. But he should also, for those of you who are in the schools and, in the education field, he should also learn about them. So we shouldn't erase or change textbooks, change, curricula, because this is what's going on in our country. This is where we're at, and there are, fundamental things and, changes that need to be made, but there were also a lot of steps that led us to this point where many of us are now unhappy because of all these different chaotic events that kind of came together to bring this kind of perfect storm of, really horrible potential for all of us to really be even more unhappy in the future. And so, I feel it's the duty of everyone in this room to really try and do something at the end of the day. Just do something.
Okay. Mary Leah, yeah.
I'm representing the live stream. It's about 120 people, and they've come up with 3 questions, so I guess I'll just pose all 3, and if you have one you want to answer, that would be good. The first one is, for those who are embedded in academe but also doing applied work, what advice would you give others who are trying to bridge the scholar-activist divide? The second is, how do we hold ourselves and each other accountable when oppressive dynamics may occur in these ideally anti-oppressive groups? And the third is, how do you talk to people who couldn't care less that they're contributing to repression? How do you balance the emotion, anger you feel with the need to educate those people? And one has just come in for nichHi, which is, what is the role of culture and the arts in activism?
Do you want to start with that one?
Sure. What is the role of culture in the arts and activism? I think that it's integral. I think that art is integral to activism and protest for sure. From the very act of protest, which is like activating your voice and your creativity in terms of what chants you're using and how you're getting through it. I think that artists have an amazing opportunity to give voice to folks who would much rather be or are too afraid to make noise. I think artists have a certain sense of fearlessness about that. That is particularly useful with activism. And artists, of course, are obsessed with the zeitgeist, or sort of into what's happening culturally, and are able to use it, or able to leverage culture in a way that gets folks listening and engages people. So I think that is how art and culture intersect with activism. I also wanted to address, rather quickly, because I don't know exactly what's happening on campus here, although I can imagine, and I want to say that, I'm not a part of this system, this education system, but I am part of a theater industry that is also another kind of system. As was quickly said in my bio, that I'm creating an equity task force in the theater community. I think that one way to speak to direct action is to have more meetings and conversations, grab coffee and a cheap meal with folks as often as possible, as much as they are willing to give you time. If you want to speak to your dean or whomever for 10 minutes, set up that meeting, say what you need to say politely, and then ask for another meeting and bring a friend and say what you need to say again and do it again and do it again. That's what I'm doing at various theaters in the city, talking to them about their their seasons and the mess that is. I think that's one way to approach direct action.
I wish he hadn't left.
I just had a quick couple of examples of where art or the creative side and activism meet. There's a chapter in Colorado that I can't remember what issue. Obviously, it related to reproductive rights, but they dressed up as the women from The Handmaid's Tale, and it got so much press across the country because they used a creative side to make their point express. We've also had people here. There's a group called the Creative Resistance, and other people have been working to create explainer videos that are kind of punchy and fun to watch, but they also help people learn about something like the IDC.
I'd like to reframe the question before about direct action and put it in terms of if any of you have ever experienced limitations to activism, because students are experiencing consequences to activism on campus, and when we represent marginalized communities, also marginalized communities might have serious consequences to some of this work. So I was wondering if you could speak to any experience you have with any of that.
Well, I can sort of address that. I was going to address the question about sort of bridging the scholar-academic divide because, again, my professional work is not grassroots work. I sort of consider myself one step removed, which is protecting the rights of people who are doing that work. And a lot of the day-to-day work that I've been seeing since the election has been just basic, people want to know if they can do X, Y, or Z direct action and if the consequences they're facing are legit or not. Now, there's obviously limits, right? Because sometimes there's people who, we have to tell them, unfortunately, your employer can fire you for this, even though it's awful and you're, doing something righteous. And then, people face a choice of civil disobedience or am I going to take those consequences anyway because the principle's important enough to me. But I do think one thing that's empowering is people to know. And I have noticed in the past year a particular rise in academics and people maybe who aren't necessarily known as being activists, but graduate students, undergrads, I think always known for being part of activist communities, but we're getting graduate students and faculty and scientists and people who are really jazzed up about issues who've just never done direct action before and want really basic fundamental, 101. What can I do? What are the consequences that I might face so I can make an informed choice? So I'm going into this and I can decide if this principle is important enough to me that I'm willing to risk those consequences, or if those consequences aren't okay, I can fight back and say that, no, I actually am allowed to do this without you firing me or punishing me in this way. So, it's not the answer because sometimes, unfortunately there are consequences, but at least I am seeing an uptick in people wanting to know so that they have a sense of empowerment and they can make choices accordingly.
So I just had a question about what advocacy and activism looks like on a day-to-day and a little bit more logistically. And I appreciate NYCHi, I believe, sharing that it's like you get emails and you go to the meetings and just kind of understanding where to start. And then once you're there, and some of you are holding full-time jobs, it sounds like Esha, yes, and Elizabeth, your jobs are this. And so I'm not sure for anyone else if you also have a job while participating in these organizations and how you balance those.
I'm a student right now, and we create these panels, and it's hard. It's just hard, but it's not impossible. There's once you sort of accept, I think what Nicole was saying earlier, it's like you accept that this is it's your new normal. It's just the way that your days are. They incorporate active resistance. What that is, of course, on a day-to-day basis varies because you're not not all of us, some people are marching in the streets every day. Those groups are not enormous, but they are there. They're certainly there in our city. The more sort of practical, I want to say, ways to actively resist on a day-to-day basis is making those calls, writing letters. We brought stamped postcards, and we're going to put on the board a way for you guys to really easily find your representatives' addresses. There's a website. You put in your zip code. Super straightforward. Because postcard writing is actually really valuable, mostly because the offices check envelopes and will throw out enveloped letters, and postcards go right through. But those are ways to really participate. Make those calls. Write about a specific issue to a specific person, and you make sure that it gets into their mailbox. It's not easy, and sometimes it's a pain in the ass, and you don't want to do it. But there are ways to manage it so that it is just, 10 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour of your day, if you have that to spare on a given day, where you're calling multiple representatives, where you are sharing information. Maybe you have family members in red states, people that you want to talk to. I think one of those questions online was about how to talk to people that are difficult. You find it difficult to communicate with about these issues. It is hard, but patience should prevail. You shouldn't come at it in a holier-than-thou way. You want to have common understanding. That's the goal. You want to be able to have a rational interaction with someone. Ask them why they feel the way they feel. Some people, a lot of people, and this goes both ways, this is red and blue and right and left, you inherit political opinions, social opinions from your family, from your religious organization. See how people actually feel. See what they understand. What is the information that's missing, if anything. Have a conversation, not an argument. Really try to get to know why they're coming from, where they're coming from. That's a valuable thing to do. It's not earth-shaking activism, but it's one more person that you can actually have common ground with, or attempt at least. But it's not easy, and but it is the new normal. You just have to think of it as your baseline. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this one thing today. Maybe I'll have time to do two, but I'm definitely going to do one.
I also think both Nikki and Lily said it very well. It's looking for what is the need. And I think for myself, just because my schedule can be hectic and I do a lot of different things, I go, what is the need for today? And kind of making that my emphasis and focusing on that. All of the other things are equally as important, and I will go back to them, but going both logistically and emotionally, what is today? What is the thing that I need to focus on today? What is the urgent thing that I need to do? And then go from there.
I also just wanted to thank you all for coming, and I feel like there's something very powerful about seeing you all sitting here together. That 6 women who you're not exuding power in the way that we see, on a very strange level, at a national level or international level. But you all have managed to find a way to empower yourselves from within, and I think that's really important. I think that's sort of the key to activism in my own mind, and I believe in sacred activism, which is a form of really self-empowerment, and then making the changes within that need to get made. And I have conflicts, and I think that's part of my question, is that so much of the power play that's going on, even in this room, that's been going on with questions and the way people speak to each other, is about not empowering yourself, but taking away somebody else's power. And so my question for you is, how in your daily work, I mean, you're all so practical and you all are out there doing real work, whether it's through art or through emails or, through court cases, empowering teachers to empower children. starting movement to educate people. How do we empower ourselves without taking away other people's power? And how do we move away from conflict and into more dialogue-based and solution-based ideas where we can have a vision that we can all really work towards?
I think that one really crucial way of doing that in terms of, talking about power is to first acknowledge how you, who you are in the world, how you are viewed in the world. As soon as you recognize, right, what you look like and the power that holds, and who you are and where you come from and the power that may or may not hold, I think that then you can operate in a space in a way that is receptive to other people.
Thank you so much for that question and just your thoughtfulness behind it. I think for myself, and this might be, I'm taking that and also pivoting to the question you posed before with no understanding of what's going on here at Columbia, but something that I've had to do too, I work in a government institution, recognizing that there is power at every single level, and there's just power dynamics among all of us, trying to be thoughtful about them. But perhaps I've been lucky, or I often find too that there's just some boulders that I'm not in the position, I don't have the voice, I might not look a certain way, that I know it won't be received from me in the way I want it to. And so maybe for all of you as students, you make up this school, you have so much power here, but oftentimes in the position of a student, there are consequences you could face if you make choices that could be perfectly valid to make. Are there people that you could mobilize and find as allies who, if they made those same choices, the school would respond to them differently? If there's something that I know I would really like to get done, but I know that maybe I'm not the person who could do it, and I am the person who could do it, but maybe the person who I need to work with me doesn't see me as that person, maybe I talk to my supervisor. She always listens to me. Maybe she can, pull that lever. Maybe your alumni base, they can't be penalized in the same way that you all might be able to as students. They are also being asked quite frequently to donate money back to this institution. Could they be mobilized to use their voices in the same way that you're trying to use yours? And the power dynamic is slightly different. Is there a tenured professor you all could be working with who, can listen to you and help mobilize things the way you want them to be moved? But just because they occupy a different position of power, they might be able to pivot in ways that right now you can't be. So that's just a thought I have. I don't know if it's helpful at all, but that's something I've tried to do, is recognize that power just exists among all of us and it's terrible, and let's work to dismantle it, but also how can we use it to our advantage as well.
I had a comment about, you were talking about consequences.
Can you use the microphone? I'm so sorry.
You was talking about consequences and, people doing, certain activist work, and then there might be a consequence behind that. But it's always been like that throughout history. Like if you go back in time, you look at Rosa Parks. She sat down and didn't want to get up. It was a consequence behind that. And Martin Luther King and so on and so forth. People have been jailed for years for fighting what they knew was unjust. Even today, if you look at Colin Kaepernick and what he's doing right now, he get a lot of flack. They blackballed him. They say he couldn't play ball. Even though he's still physically fit to play football, they don't want him to do that. But he's been recognized throughout, magazines and publishers and stuff like that. It was a consequence. But he said, I'm going to still fight for what I believe in, and he ran with that. So when it's time to be written down in the history books, they're going to have him on the right side of history and not the wrong one. So we all know what the right, what's just and unjust, and it's up to us to really deal with them consequences and be aware, because self-awareness is the key. So if you're aware of what's going on, you're like, all right, I'll take that chance because it's worth it. Thank you.
Sorry. Real quick. So you all shared about the practical ways and the groundwork as activists and advocates that you're doing, especially in a legal setting, and understanding your representatives and who can have power in that setting. But historically we know that verdicts can be either ignored, court cases cannot be seen. You can decide to enforce an executive order or not. So how do you balance that with being able to actually, at the very least, share ideology about the liberation for all people, how do you think that you can, how in your experience have you shared something past what may be concrete into like an ideological and personal belief about liberating people in a productive way?
I think, and I can't speak about it in the legal sense, but listening is really important. And here, I think there's something very powerful in taking a moment to actually hear what the other person is saying, even if you completely disagree with it, and trying to understand where that sentiment may be coming from. It's the idea of knowledge is power. It empowers you in the sense that not only do you now have a grounding to have a discussion, hopefully, but you're able to bring a more holistic view of not only your own personal views, but be able to communicate it in such a way that might be more holistic in the conversation of two very opposing views. That's at least what my perspective would be on it.
Well, I was just going to say, I think if I understand your question, it's sort of getting beyond the kind of political or legal or activism work we do. And to me, I think the way to live that out is actually very personal. It's on a very personal level. That, sometimes you'll see people who are professional advocates or professional activists who are just, not really living that in their day-to-day life, or, and finding that way. Social workers. Right. So, I'll just give you an example. For me, the small way that I try to do that is, respond to everyone who comes to me asking a question, or whether it's a young person, or, trying to be on a personal level an accessible and open individual, even if I can't actually help you, or I may even disagree with you, or I'm not going to be on board with what you want to do. Just saying, like, there's still this humanity in the one-on-one. If someone comes to me for help, I'm there, even to give a response or to treat you with that respect on an individual level, rather than, sort of having this outward message or position and not living it.
First, I want to say thanks for coming and all the work that you guys do. My mom has been an activist for 20 years in the gun violence prevention movement, and one of her biggest frustrations in that type of role is the internal issues inside nonprofits and other grassroots movements. And someone mentioned how egos get involved, and maybe losing your message and what the real point of the work that you're doing is. Also, she gets frustrated by maybe two different organizations who have the same goals but now are competing in a way that is actually taking a step back from making any progress, because you're getting all messed up in all these other bureaucracy issues and things like that. So I guess my question is, what are your experiences with that kind of situation, and how do you see to resolve this kind of issue so we actually can make progress quicker and don't get delayed by these types of internal things?
That's a great question. Does anyone want to? I'll start. What organization does your mom work for?
Okay, so she founded the Million Mom March.
Hey.
Yeah.
That.
Okay, yeah. So they had a march on Washington in 2000. Now she doesn't actually get paid by any organization, which is an issue on her own, because they tell her she's too experienced, so no one wants to hire her. I don't know. It's like other things that maybe other issues. But she's just, she just did a documentary called 5 Awake on how to change policy within gun violence laws and things like that. But yeah, she works for Brady Campaign a lot and things like that.
I think I was the one who mentioned ego briefly earlier. We were very lucky during the planning for the march. There, as I said before, there was no time. There was no time for ego. There was no time for animosity to blossom, which is what happens. It's sort of you have an umbrella, and then under that umbrella is a lot of unique individuals, and there should be sort of an overarching feeling of commonality that we are one, but we're not. At the end of the day, we're all people. This is a room full of individuals. There has to be, if in a given moment you feel attacked or you feel like your colleague or teammate is wrong, there's a way to address it. It's all about communication. That's part of why I went on to study mental health counseling this year, was to better understand how to communicate. I think I'm okay at it to start with, but there are ways of communicating. There are ways of having a conversation that were tempers to run high would be an argument, but you don't have to classify it that way. If you're working with someone, what's your objective? Your objective is to get the job done. I think it's much more challenging when you don't have a specific goal. I think the march was very specific. We had one day. Everything had to run as smoothly as possible. As I said before, when that was over, there's this sort of feeling of like, all right, there's 500 other issues that we all have our other passions and interests, and then suddenly the umbrella sort of dissipates. It's like, all right, we're still individuals and we still have our individual interests. So I think it's really valuable in that regard to find one issue and then be that person in that group who is able to take a step back and say, all right, this doesn't have to become emotional. This isn't personal. That's sort of the crux of it. It's not personal. This is about the greater good. This is about the larger organization. This is not about me. It's not about you. If you're angry with me because of something I said, let's talk about it. Say you didn't understand, and I'll explain it to you. There's just, I feel like we all individually have a responsibility to be that person. I don't want to say be the adult in the room, because I know like some little kids who are more mature than some adults I know. But to be the person who is going to take a deep breath, stay on message. We all have the responsibility to be that person, and I think if everyone is that person in a given organization, it will run really smoothly.
Unfortunately, I think we only have time for one or two more questions, so I'm going to go right here.
Thank you. I appreciate the panelists and all that have been contributed, as well as to the individuals who question. I'm going to get to the money question. How do you fund activism and advocacy? Because so certainly when we're talking about grassroots issues, I think in many communities, they're not thinking about money and how it happens. They just expect things to happen. But we need money, and those of you who serve in capacities, whether you're volunteering and your advocacy, probably would love to put more full time into it if you could get paid. So could you talk a little bit about how to increase money, increase visibility, and how you fund the cause?
So it's not easy, is first. Funding is an issue with nonprofits, the arts, I know in particular, and Nikki understands. Just generally, it's not, people are really excited about investing in a lot of different things, which then means going to one person, they are not going to necessarily be able to give your organization as much as they might be able to give to a lot of people. What I found is, one, partnering with larger organizations and saying, this is what we have and we're really excited about what you're doing. Why don't we work together? Also coming to different places and going, while we can't pay you, can we use this space for free? Or can you help sponsor us? What I've personally found is going to people and just literally going to them in person and saying, I need help. Can you help me? People are very receptive to that. Emails and calls and texts, it's just a screen. So it's harder to say yes because everybody wants to support everything. So that's one major thing that I know that I've been able to do that's been very helpful. Also grants and going to grant courses. In fact, the Brooklyn Arts Council, I know that they, before they have their grants applications, hold courses on how to write a good grant. So just taking the time to, one day after work, go to this grant course and learn about how to write a proper grant in order to then help fund your organization. And also, not letting no deter you. It can be really hard because you'll get 100 no's, but then you'll get that one yes. That one, yes, we can be your sponsor, or yes, you can have this space for rehearsal or for your event. And really just allowing yourself to not feel defeated. And I think that holistically goes back to the idea of self-care. Just letting it happen and knowing that the work will pay off, it just might take time.
So, I want to first off thank you all. It's an amazing group of women for coming today and sharing your experiences and hopefully helping us all feel a little bit less defeated. So first of all, thank you so much. I also want to thank Carmelo and Susan Whitty and Mary Leah for helping get this together. And I know that Lily has some postcards for everyone to take, and we're going to put the website up on the board where you can identify your local representatives to send these postcards to. And we were talking this morning about how it's important to not only send complaints, but also to really give some thanks to some of our amazing legislators that are really supporting us and doing some really great work. So to do that as well. And I want to thank everyone online and everyone for coming, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. So thank you.
Postcards are by the door. You can grab one and a cookie on your way out. Oh, and if you had a good time today, if you have more questions or you want to learn about something else, Eden and I are doing another talk, discussion with the chief counsel from the Giffords Law Center on Gun Control this Sunday at NichHi Cinema in Williamsburg at the bar, not in a movie theater. It's at noon on Sunday. It's going to be fascinating. It's a little more casual than this format. You can sit and have a cup of coffee, have brunch or whatever, and learn more about gun control and the Second Amendment. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Nikki?
Yeah.